Hello, everyone, and welcome back to People Do Want to Know podcast. In the true spirit of this podcast, where I introduce you to people do want to know, but maybe don't yet know, I have a guest this week who is an up-and-coming social media personality and a fantastic musician, Nolan Marsh. I came across Nolan on TikTok when his video about Jew Church went viral. In this video, Nolan talks about how he enlisted in the U.S. Army and he was the only Jew in his company of 250 soldiers. He explains that on Sundays, irrespective of what religion you are, the soldiers would split up to their respective religious services. Christians are split up by denomination, for example. The drill sergeant, who wasn't used to seeing Jews, asked if there were any people there for Jew Church. And of course, Nolan was the only one and he had to identify himself. Anyway, I highly recommend that you watch the video. There's a lot more to the story, and there's a whole lot more to Nolan's life story that you will hear about today. Nolan is a complete breath of fresh air when comparing to some of the more recognizable high-profile guests we've heard from in recent weeks and months. He's not jaded by the ginsta scene, and he lives in the countryside, which all contributes to his warm, worldly, fascinating demeanor. Throughout the episode, you will hear Nolan weave details about his life story, but I'll give you a brief overview. Nolan is originally from New York City and comes from a very musical family. His mother was an actress and a performer on Broadway and the radio. His grandfather was one of the founders and musical directors of Sesame Street. His brother is an accomplished pianist, and his father is a financial analyst and excellent writer who helped Nolan develop a knack for critical thought and public speaking. Nolan even went to a performing arts high school in New York City where he studied percussion and music performance. And after high school, he enrolled in a liberal arts college for a year, but he left out of a distaste for academia and a desire to be thrown into the world. He often recalls the quote attributed to Mark Twain, "I have never let my schooling interfere with my education." Once he left college, he auditioned to be a percussionist in the U.S. Army and enlisted. He completed basic training in South Carolina, attended the Army School of Music in Virginia, and then was assigned to play in an Army band on an artillery base in Oklahoma. It was there that he and his unit performed in ceremonies around the state, from troop deployment send-offs to changes of command, retirement ceremonies, military balls, and even funerals. During his time in the Army, Nolan connected with Chabad and nurtured his Jewish education and heritage. He met with Chabad rabbis to rap to fill-in, spoke with military chaplains, and sought out Jewish communities wherever he was. Following his service, Nolan developed a love for the road. He took a 5,000-mile road trip around the country, breaking bread with strangers and making new friends. With the money that he saved from the Army, he flew to Europe and traveled by train to 13 countries, often conversing with strangers on the train cars and in the streets where he traveled. After his adventure, he continued to work in music and then even learned how to convert high-roof vans and buses into off-grid homes powered by solar panels and other technology. He's now living in a bus himself, making music and helping others build such buses and vans. Aside from Nolan's fascinating stories and many lives that he's already lived, I also wanted to talk to him to break out of my own echo chamber and pick the brain of somebody who doesn't live in a bustling Jewish community. How is he managing that? What does he make of it? I wanted to know all the things. In hearing this episode, I think you will be persuaded that you too, just like Nolan, should live in the countryside. There's something really romantic or dreamy about that lifestyle, almost like an absence makes the heart grow fonder effect. For instance, because Nolan lived on a ranch where there wasn't anything Jewish, he would often order zaybars to have babka and rugelach shipped to the ranch. Another takeaway from this conversation is the power of music as a common language between the world. Music can certainly bring people together and remove any differences or prejudice among us. You'll hear great stories from Nolan about this as well. Please enjoy this episode. Hello, Nolan. Welcome to People Do Want to Know podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Margarita. I appreciate it.
I am so excited to learn about your story and all your travels. I want to hear you tell us about yourself. What do you do and how did you get there?
Okay, well, at this point in my life, I live pretty nomadically. I live on the road. I build vehicles into campers, and they are off-grid, so they've got solar panels on the roof and their own battery bank, and it's all self-replenishing as you drive, as there's sunlight. So I don't plug into RV parks. I'm just kind of this wacky nomadic guy. I also built this bus, which I currently live in, into a mobile music studio. So I write and record music from the road. I share my stories with people throughout the course of my life. I share them on social media. And that is what has led me to this podcast with you. So yeah, it's a nomadic life. And I'm from New York City originally, which is ironic for the lifestyle that I have currently, because I was such a city boy growing up. And now I'm just kind of all over the place. But yeah, my life is one of adventure, of music, of collaborations with friends of mine, and it's surrounded with family and friends. I dedicate a lot of my life to the people that I love, the people I care about, often, visiting those people and spending periods of time in different places. So yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your Jewish upbringing. I recently saw you did a video where you played music with a guy who also plays accordion. And in the video, you said the word chlopce, which in Ukrainian means like men. And I was surprised that you knew this word. And I want to learn more about your Jewish heritage. I know that you know Yiddish. You clearly know some Ukrainian. So tell me more.
So the guy in the video is actually my brother. And he and I, growing up, would often play music together and collaborate. And we have a combination of a shared musical mind, I'd say, and comedic mind. So those two components have often piggybacked off of each other. We like making videos for people, and we just like sharing in our creative brains, and stuff usually just comes out. It's funny, a lot of this is not usually planned. I mean, maybe one of us will start playing something on an instrument and the other person chimes in, and then we say, oh, this is a good bit. Like, there's something good here. Let's just capture this for 5 minutes. So in that video, my brother was playing accordion and I was playing percussion on a Frisbee. So that is a little insight to our funny world. In terms of my Jewish upbringing, yeah, we were brought up Jewish. We were both bar mitzvahed. My grandparents spoke Yiddish around the house, and some Yiddish was passed down in bits and pieces throughout the course of our lives, through my mother, through us. And as an adult, I've enjoyed learning Yiddish even more, just in a conversational sense, often going to Crown Heights or Williamsburg or Borough Park in Brooklyn and practicing with the Hasidic community, going to local delis, practicing with Chabad rabbis on the road, many of whom are from Crown Heights or passed through Crown Heights, and Yiddish was their first language. It's been a lot.
And you also served, right? And you played percussion.
That's right.
For the U.S. Army.
That's right. It was a very unique job. I did 1 year of college, and then when I was 19, I decided I wanted to enlist in the military, in the U.S. military. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but at one point in time, I remember seeing this soldier in an airport carrying a guitar, and I thought, oh, that is pretty wacky. I've never seen that before. And I remember that my grandfather in World War II was a percussionist in the Army band and was a percussionist throughout the course of his life. So I had that in the back of my mind, and I wound up going through the proper channels to audition for the Army band, which was quite the extensive process. I had to meet with an Army music recruiter and a normal Army recruiter. And I had to be careful to make sure the paperwork was all consistent, because the Army music recruiter, you would say, oh, don't say anything to the Army recruiter, because then, you'll get a job that you don't want. Everything has to pass through me. So this master sergeant, a senior enlisted guy, he flew up to New Jersey to Fort Dix and auditioned me in percussion. I sent in a whole packet. A week later, he said, you got the job. And in a few months, you're shipping out to basic combat training in South Carolina. Then my life was changed. I had a shaved head. I was doing the whole thing. I was with all the infantry and artillery guys, and it wasn't a musical world until I went to my job training, where I went to the Army School of Music in Virginia following basic combat training. And then I was stationed in Oklahoma on an artillery base. So that's where I spent most of my time.
It's interesting to me to hear about your life story, because I think it is very unusual for kids that grow up in Jewish families, this free-spirited life of pursuing music and the Army, and then a digital nomad lifestyle, and learning how to do a true craft. Like, there aren't that many Jewish kids that go on to become experts in building camper vans and remote homes or things like that. And I also find that those people that I know that are veterans or that served in some capacity, they end up meeting a lot of non-Jewish folks who are actually quite supportive of Israel and Jewish people. Has that been your experience?
Well, yes, for the most part, I would say. I will say that leaving New York City, a big Jewish epicenter, it was definitely a culture shock in terms of realizing how few Jews there are. When you grow up in a very Jewish environment and there are Jews all around you, it's very familiar. And then all of a sudden you go out into the world and then you're the token Jew wherever you go. And that's been my experience, mostly being the first Jew that somebody has ever met. And the only Jew they know of is an ideological Jew, whatever identity or understanding of a Jew is passed down to them from generation to generation in their culture, or whatever tabloid they choose to subscribe to on the news, which influences their perception. So yeah, I would say most of the time there has been friendliness and people have welcomed me with open arms. I've also been in places where people have told me not to mention publicly that I'm Jewish. I have wild stories. One time I went to a blues jam where, if you know about a blues jam, it's where, there's a house band at a certain venue or club and they open it up to the public. So if you're a musician, you go to that bar or venue and you can play music with people on stage. Well, I went to a listing for a blues jam and it turned out to be a neo-Nazi bar. I kid you not. This is a true story. I wound up at a blues jam, the neo-Nazi bar, where there were, I went to the back where the stage was, and there were swastikas engraved in the tables, swastikas embroidered in the vests of the bikers that were at this bar. Yeah, it was pretty dark. And the irony to all of this insanity and ignorance is that they were playing blues music, okay, with a Jew. So they're playing Black American music traditionally with a Jew on stage at a neo-Nazi bar. So all of this hatred is completely ideological. Nothing is rooted in anything concrete and real because people don't know a lot of the people that they hate. It's way easier to hate somebody if you don't have a friend who is of that culture, who belongs to that religion, that identity or tribe, ethnicity, whatever it might be. So my adventures, although they have brought me to very welcoming environments, I've definitely been to some unwelcoming environments that have thrown me for a loop.
What do you make of that? Do you think the solution is to continue to expose people to Jews and helping them be familiar with our way of life and our culture? Because you're somebody that's interacting with non-Jews probably at this point more than you are interacting with Jews on a day-to-day basis, given some of the rural areas that you visited and where you've stayed for a while. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the antidote to this prejudice is exposure, but it depends on the type of exposure. If exposure is just a news tabloid, that's not necessarily the right exposure because it's not rooted in reality. If you know somebody personally who is different from you, this is why I'm grateful for my upbringing, even though I don't live there anymore, but in New York City, because my friends were from all over the world, every single religion and culture, ethnicity, all of that. You grow up with people that they're your classmate in sixth grade. You grow up with people that you're engaged in all these shenanigans in the cafeteria, and it doesn't matter where they're from because they're just your friend. And when people grow up in such homogenous and insular environments, which they can't control a lot of the time, that's what's difficult. You can't always control it. You know what you know. You have no people around you to share a different perspective or to actually ground your ideological narrative in something concrete, in reality. So to answer your question, long story long, as my Aunt Carol loves to say, long story long, I do think that sharing Jewish identity with the public, and especially social media, can be helpful for this, as detrimental as it has been and painful, especially over the past few years for a lot of people and a lot of Jews. I actually think it can help educate people. Honestly, I really, really do. And Jews, unlike other religions, are not missionaries in the same sense. You don't have Jews going to non-Jews and saying, hey, convert, convert, convert. knocking on your door. They don't do that. I mean, the closest thing is Chabad, but Chabad is for Jews who are going to show up at your door with a challah. You know, it's a different story. So because of that, the public, a lot of people don't really know about Jews. You know, there aren't a lot of Jews in the entire world. So a lot of the opinions become ignorant and misguided, you know?
I agree with you. And going back to the story about the neo-Nazi bar, to your point, what did you end up doing as a Jew at the bar?
Well, it's easy for people to look at a situation like that and say, oh my God, you got to get the hell out of there. You got to get out of there. You got to get out of there. But sometimes when you're in environments that are dangerous or sketchy or all of these things, the answer is not so clear cut. You don't want to make a stink. You don't want to stand out. You don't want to do anything that would attract attention. And to be honest, when I was in this bar, I laughed, but it's like a dark laugh. I had this feeling, it was a combination of horror and curiosity the same time. These two feelings were connecting with each other. The horror, obviously, is as a Jew, you see all these bikers in front of you with swastikas embroidered in the chest. In the back of the backyard, there was a broken down school bus with a mannequin head and horns. And on the side of the bus it said SS that was painted on the side of the bus, right? Yeah, I was terrified, but I was also thinking, like, is this really happening right now? Like, is this real? I mean, how dark is this? Maybe that's bad. Maybe not everybody should be so curious, but I wound up at the bar. I stayed for a tune for a song, and I said to my friend, we gotta get out of here. And I was in the military still, so I had a high and tight haircut with the sides of my head shaved, you know, and I was wearing an Elvis Presley American flag t-shirt, some like Brooklyn hippie cardigan and boat shoes and jeans. Like, I always look like I don't blend in anyway, so there's so much I can help. But I wound up playing a tune, and there's so many other parts of the story that I won't share because they're a little too obscene in terms of, you know, vocabulary and things that were expressed and things that I overheard. But yeah, I remember playing this blues song with this group of guys, and I was with a friend of mine, and I was probably laughing while I was playing, laughing at the irony of playing the blues as a Jew with these neo-Nazis who had no idea that I was even a Jew. I mean, that's what's so hilarious about it. And here they are connecting with me in this musical sense, and I'm looking at them from the outside thinking, oh my gosh, this is just so, on an elementary level, so silly, so ignorant, and it starts so young, and then it turns into something that's violent. It turns into something that's dangerous, but the root of it is just a lack of exposure, and here you all are in this zone that you consider your safe space, which is the greatest irony, is that I'm in their safe space, and you're playing Black American music with a Jew. So I stayed for a song, and I thought, I got to get out of here. This is enough.
This reminds me of Alex Edelman's Broadway show, which I don't know how true it is, but it's based on how he found some Nazi meetup in Queens and he went undercover as a Jew. And then at the end, they figured out he was a Jew and he worked really hard to make sure they couldn't gauge it. But he looks really, really Jewish. So they were suspicious from the very get-go. So if he ever writes a sequel, you should contribute your story to his next Broadway show.
I absolutely would love to. There's this other quick little story that's not my story, but it's something I think about. There is a bass player, Daryl Davis, who's an African-American man in the U.S. He has played and been on tour all over the country and world. And he had a story where he wanted to interview the Grand Wizard of the KKK at the time, in an earlier generation, as a black man, okay? The chutzpah to interview the Grand Wizard of the KKK as a black man. He interviews this guy at a hotel and didn't tell the guy that he was black prior to the interview. He didn't tell the Grand Wizard that he was black. So they have this interview, and they're both kind of on their toes once they see each other because they think, oh, is this a setup? What's going on? They both have kind of a bodyguard with them. And they're in this hotel room, and they hear this big crash in the middle of the interview. And in that crash, they thought, oh, did somebody just draw a weapon? Did somebody do anything violent? And it was actually the ice maker in the freezer in the hotel room. And they both laugh at the absurdity of this being the ice maker. And as they laughed, they started to grow a little more comfortable with each other, because humor, lightness can cause people to actually connect, remove a bit of those fangs. And the Grand Wizard of the KKK agreed to do another interview with Daryl at another point in time. They do another interview, and over time, they're invited to their family homes for dinner, meeting each other's wives and all this. Now, you'd think, how could you possibly allow this to happen? These are people who, you have one group of people who want the extermination of another group of people and many other groups of people. How could you allow this interview and this connection to happen? Well, over time, Daryl started inviting the Grand Wizard to his gigs, and the Grand Wizard winds up coming to his blues gigs. And over time, the Grand Wizard invites other members of the KKK to Daryl's blues gigs. And then on top of that, the Grand Wizard invited Daryl to some of the rallies. Can you imagine that? Going to KKK rallies as a black man? Can you imagine that? I can't even imagine this. So over time, as these friendships developed and these fangs were removed, Daryl Davis caused many members of the KKK to disrobe, including the Grand Wizard. Over time, relinquished his title, his throne, his robe, all of this, and was no longer a member of the party. So if that, in its most extreme example of ideological hatred, doesn't exemplify the fact that lightness and love and connection can actually eradicate prejudice, I don't know what does.
That is a beautiful story. I am very touched hearing that. And I'm curious to know, what's the biggest lesson that you think you've learned in your nomadic lifestyle? And I ask because there was a time in my life that I was also a digital nomad, quote unquote, during the pandemic. And I traveled by myself for close to over a year. I couldn't go a long time without visiting a city in America that had a large Jewish population, because I would always have this gut response of like, this is a Goysha place. I can't be here. I don't belong. It's just Goy vibes. Like, I got to get out of here. And now, especially post October 7th, I can't. I just can't be anywhere where I don't feel Jewish and where it doesn't feel Jewish to me. I just feel really strange. I do think it's a trauma response, 100%. And that's why I'm curious to know, as someone who is doing the opposite end of the spectrum, what do you think that life has taught you?
There are times where it's felt very isolating, especially on high holy days and not being with a Jewish community. And sometimes just throughout the year, just wishing that I felt that sense of true familial connection and bond to be with the tribe. When I was I lived on a cattle ranch for a few years in Oklahoma, and I remember for Hanukkah, I didn't have a menorah and I didn't have any Hanukkah candles, and my friend actually drove an hour to grab the last menorah at a Christian store. It was the last menorah there, and he brought it back to this cattle ranch, and I didn't have any Hanukkah candles, so I had church vigil candles, and I shaved them down just so they could fit in the menorah, were the right size and everything. So there are times where, although it's felt very isolating and it's felt very difficult, there have been these moments of sweetness. And sometimes those moments of sweetness have meant more than I could even imagine. Sometimes in difficult situations, it was like this with the Army too. In difficult situations, when there are little kernels of sweetness, it turns into memories for a lifetime, versus sometimes when you're inundated with everything on a day-to-day basis, you don't always realize what you have. It's the principle, you don't realize what you have until you don't have it anymore, in a sense. So that's been my experience on the road, where although it's been difficult sometimes, although I've faced all kinds of stuff and anti-Semitism from the road, I've had these moments of sweetness that have, if anything, furthered my relationship with Judaism. So it's been an interesting balance. And the other thing I'll say is that since living on the road, I have been to so many different shuls across the whole country. I have been to shuls in Idaho, in Utah, in Alaska, in Oklahoma, in Louisiana, in you name it. And I've found the local shul, call the rabbi or text the rabbi if whatever number is available. And every single time the rabbi has said, come, come, come. Are you hungry? Are you hungry? Have you had something to eat? Come in, come for dinner. Not having met me before. So my world, although it's so nomadic, is full of all of these kernels of beauty, of connection in so many aspects of life, and especially in Judaism. So that's how I'd answer that.
Why did you even decide to become a nomad?
Well, that's a good question. I was living in New Orleans for 3 years. I was living there full time as a freelance drummer and musician. I'd play gigs up and down the Mississippi on steamboats, dinner jazz cruises. I was very much invested in city life, and the pandemic hit. And in COVID times, everybody lost their gigs in so many different industries. So I lost all my gigs, and my buddy who I had served with in Oklahoma, he said, hey, move up to this cattle ranch for $100 a month. It's just me and you. We've got a few rooms, we've got a backyard, and I started to slow down. I was away from city life. So then I was just totally immersed in country life. My world was just walking up and down dirt roads, going on 20, 40-mile bike rides just around these little towns. And hitting a gas station was like a big deal. Hitting a mailbox was a big deal. And I became more and more comfortable with spending time alone. I spend a lot of time with people on the road, but I spend a lot of time alone. I've had to develop that skill, which is not always easy to develop, especially being from a big city where you're used to so many people around you all the time. With my comfort of spending time alone and entertaining myself, I'd play trumpet to cows who would come up to the wire. I would play old Chet Baker tunes, old jazz tunes to these cows. Cows are some of the most attentive audience members, I'll tell you. They love music. I know this is absolutely hilarious. But combined with spending time alone and my love of road tripping, I just felt that the happy marriage and the happy medium was combining these things, combining a lifestyle where I could be on the road, combining being able to record music on the road, build that into a studio, spending time visiting everybody I love. It just kind of made sense. And the more I did it, the more and more it made sense. It just kind of worked itself out. And I've actually been doing this for 5 years now, full time.
That's actually crazy. Do you think you'll ever stop? And if so, where would you end up?
A lot of people ask me that. I am very open to all of the things. I'm open to this lifestyle. I'm open to this lifestyle being a component of my life, but, having one home base that could change down the line in a relationship with a family, with all of these different things. So I don't have one dead set perspective on all of this. I really don't think too much into the future, just enough to plan and to get all my ducks in a row. But the more I plan way down the line, the less present I feel, to be honest. So I'm just, as they say, going with the flow. I'm going with the flow. This is where I am, and I absolutely love it. I think it's a very, very liberating, very profound lifestyle, and it's exhausting too. I mean, right now I'm in the office of a mechanic shop in Nevada because the bus engine had to be rebuilt. So there is always something that is happening, and it is not easy, but it's so rewarding. It's so unbelievably rewarding. And also, you're aware of every single resource you have, from the electricity you have to the water consumption to how much propane you have to everything. And it causes me to be so much more in touch with my footprint, to be honest. To be so much more aware of what I am using, what I'm taking up as a human being, and to live in accordance with that. And I think that's a beautiful lesson in not taking everything for granted.
It is super beautiful and at the same time super Jewish, because Jewish life is all about making the most of what we have today and the life that we were given. And at the same time, I hear this and I have this deep sense of envy, because I myself feel like I'm a hamster in the wheel that's running all over New York. And I'm running so fast, I barely have the time, to look left and right to see how far I've come. And it's a very different lifestyle here in New York. And that time where I traveled by myself in 2020, it was the best time of my life, I'd argue, because I just had such clarity of thought. Because when you have the time to actually settle down and be aware of and only worry about what's happening today, maybe tomorrow, you're sharper cognitively and you have a lot more time for creativity and to soak things up and feel things and be positive. I'm curious to see if I'll find some kind of middle ground, because being a hamster in a wheel is definitely not sustainable. And as I heard you speak, it made me wonder, have you been to Israel?
I've never been to Israel, and I would love to go to Israel, and I'm coming for Shabbos dinner, wherever that is. I would love to come to Israel at some point in time. My family, my friends have been to Israel, but I personally never have. So at one point, I would very much love to go. And I completely empathize with what you were saying, too, in terms of feeling like you're in the grind, the hamster on the wheel, the just the everyday, especially in New York City, which is a constant grind. I mean, you're thinking about the next thing to do while you're doing the current thing. And that's part of the culture. It's a culture of movement. It's a culture of all of us trying to, stay like relevant in a professional sense, doing this, doing that, extending ourselves, overextending ourselves. It's beautiful. It's diverse. It's where you can get a wonderful babka. But boy, is it exhausting. I really empathize with what you were saying. As much as I love it, there's a reason why I've chosen a different lifestyle, at least at this point, or a different environment than the big city.
And this is related to social media, which you're now in the world of. Welcome to this madness of social media. Yes. And I'll tell you why. The world of social media, even like my podcast, it's all about staying relevant in a time where things are constantly changing. I took, I think, 2 weeks off from posting regularly on Instagram. And when I got back, there were 10 more Jewish podcasts and 5 influencers had major crises, and Israel did 55 things. Everything shifted. And I had to be like, well, shit, everybody forgot about me. I got to get back on, on there, make myself known. How are you reconciling that now that you're on social media?
That's a good point. I don't think about it too much. I don't want to think about it too much because I want to naturally attract those who like what I'm about, the messages that I share, the stories that I share personally. I don't know exactly yet the goal of social media. I'm just trying to be myself, to be honest. That's really all I'm trying to be. I have so many wild stories from my travels, from my life, from the road. I've been to all 50 states. I've traveled different countries. I'm also the type of person to just, go up to the random cashier at the gas station, make friends, and next thing you know, we're all having a burger cookout, or whatever it is at somebody's house and breaking bread together and sharing in stories. So I just like sharing these aspects of my life. And I think because I'm a bit removed from the grind, from the 9-to-5 world, and yet I've been in that world so I can relate to it. But because I'm a little removed now, I think people find that different, maybe fascinating. And I just like spreading positivity and sharing Nolan with the world. It's taken a while to get to that point. I did theater and stuff growing up and played music gigs, but in terms of really sharing who I authentically am in a public setting, that wasn't always the first thing that I was ready to do. And I think especially in the past few years, it's kicked me in the ass a little bit to just say, you know what, just put yourself out there. You never know who you're going to meet. And from meeting you, from being on this podcast, from meeting so many other people through TikTok especially, I mean, these virtual friendships that have actually turned into real life connections, it's made me realize that there is a real benefit to social media. It depends on how it's used. It's just a tool. It can go in a lot of different directions. But if you're spreading positivity, it's something that people crave so desperately, and then they cling on to each other because we all want to smile. We all want to get through the day. We all want to laugh. We all want to be interested more than we are just bombarded with these regurgitated tabloids that we see on every news article. We want to connect. So I just want to connect with people, and social media has interestingly allowed me to do that.
And I hope that in that process, you end up going to Israel because I think you would love it. And from a musical standpoint, you would really appreciate the traditional Israeli music. And I call it like music of the land because people who live in the countryside that make music, their sound is different than, Justin Bieber out in LA. There's
Right.
something spiritual and soulful. And in Israel, that is the kind of music that's there. And it's ancient and it's always tied back to the 3,000 years of history that our people have in that land. Like it's undeniable when you listen to that music. And I really think you would appreciate that.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think you're absolutely right. I love making music with people from all different cultures and backgrounds, especially originally just being a percussionist in my life. Percussion is such a deeply rooted art form and subgenre of music, such an interesting instrument, that being able to connect in that way and musically with people who have different understandings of harmony, who have different types of melodies that come to their head, different ways of processing rhythm. For example, like Western African polyrhythms and rhythmic understanding compared to our culture and world here in the States. It's so different, and yet it's so felt in a tribalistic sense as a human being. So I would absolutely love to go. I would absolutely love to connect with people musically. I mean, that would just be a delight. I follow Israeli musicians on social media and musicians from all different backgrounds, but to really actually be in person and make some music together would be such a joy.
Last year, I visited Kyrgyzstan, which is not a place that many people go to. But I, as a former Soviet Union Jew, it was pretty easy for me to travel there because people speak Russian. And we got to go to the Kyrgyz countryside where people ride horses as a mode of transportation. And we got to hear some of the Kyrgyz instruments that are thousands of years old. And what's interesting is a lot of those instruments, they don't have pitch. They're just like now, 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 now.
Wow.
So it's all percussive. And to me, Israel blends both elements. There's clearly a defined sense of pitch because the liturgy, the Jewish liturgy, is so musical. But at the same time, the instruments themselves are very old, where some of them don't produce pitch, just in the same way that you would see in Kyrgyzstan, where the instrument's like, 2,000 years old.
That is so fascinating. I mean, so many people and cultures have different relationships with their own instruments and express them in different ways which in other cultures might be completely unfamiliar. So that's fascinating. And it reminds me of when I went on a trip a few years ago with a few friends of mine, Jews from different countries. We all met up together in northern Vietnam. We went to Hanoi together and we took sleeper buses up to the mountainside on the border of China. And we stayed with a family, and they were part of the Hmong ethnic group. They live up in the mountains. They didn't even speak Vietnamese. They just spoke Hmong. I asked our host there if I could find a musical person in the community, if I could make some sort of musical connection. And she took me to this 95-year-old man. And we went on this long walk through the rice fields. And this old man came out of a little hut. I kid you not. He was blind. He had a cane. It was like out of a movie set, okay? And he's walking up to me, and he's got two flutes. He had two flutes. And he was just hearing from the host that there was this guy who was here to play some music with him. And he gestured for me to sit on this pile of bamboo sticks. And I sit with him on the bamboo sticks, and he gives me a flute, and he has a flute of his own. And he starts playing the flute. But as I was listening to him play this flute, I couldn't conceptualize how to make a sound myself. So I had this beautiful flute, but his sound was so it was so vocal, it was so raspy, it was so different from just your traditional flute. And here I am, doing my best, and we're playing, and he's laughing because he's just connecting. I mean, this guy he can't even see me, but he sees me. He sees my heart, my musical soul, and we're having this connection. And I was later told that this flute is played not only by singing into it, but by speaking into it. So it's a combination of producing a tone, but also expressing a sentiment. So I was told by the host, and you don't have that at a traditional flute that we'd play in the West, But this guy, this 95-year-old man, was playing the flute, and apparently in his flute, he was singing, "Where have you been? I've been waiting my life for you. I cooked you dinner. I want a woman." He's singing all of these things into a flute. And I had no idea, because I never thought that actual words and stories and wishes and prayers could be conveyed through a melodic instrument that was not vocal. That was not vocal. So it blew my mind, and your story just reminded me of my own. So thanks for that.
Tell me a little bit about your musical inspirations and what kind of music speaks to you most. Because now that you have your studio set up, I imagine you're going to be writing some of your own pieces, and I want to know what we can expect.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. So my original musical inspiration and influence was, without a doubt, my grandfather. Without a doubt. My grandpa, Danny. Every time I think of him, I get emotional, because he had such an impact on my life. He grew up in Brooklyn at a time where, with him being a musician, that was something that was no good, that was frowned upon by the family. Being a musician meant that you were going to be a bum in life. And to parents that I'm sure sacrificed so much for their kids and all of this, moving to a different country, coming from the shtetl, wherever, to now be in New York and have their son want to be a musician, probably didn't sit well with him, as opposed to wanting to be a doctor or something like that. And his family, they would throw out his instruments. They would be so awful. And I think that for him to nurture the musical minds and upbringings of his grandchildren, I think that brought him such joy. And I felt that from him. I felt the love that he probably wished that he received, to just put it all out there. And every birthday he'd say, "What instrument do you want? What instrument do you want? What instrument do you want?" He would teach me how to play. He taught me how to play percussion. He would give me drum lessons when I was 7 years old for 10 cents a lesson. And after a few, he said, "Oh, you got a scholarship. You don't pay 10 cents anymore. You got a scholarship." So that was my grandpa. He went on from, a poor upbringing back in the day in Brooklyn to being one of the founding members of Sesame Street. And he started with the cast of characters of Sesame Street in 1969 and became musical director for Sesame Street. And in my upbringing, when I was very little, I would go to the studio, which used to be called NOLA Recording Studios. It doesn't exist anymore, and it was on the east side, I think maybe East 57th, near Carnegie Hall. And I would be around all these musicians, these older musicians who made such an impact in jazz and in movies and theater and TV, just these wonderful, wonderful people and influences. And I actually wound up recording on Sesame Street when I was 8 years old. I sang on Sesame Street, and I would miss school to do some vocal recordings and voiceovers for Sesame Street at the studio. It's a big part of my upbringing. I would learn songs with my mother at the piano at home, and I would come in and sing these songs in the studio. But there was so much love musically that was passed on to me. So I'd say he was the biggest influence. And interestingly, as I write music, I find that my musical influences are often reflections of the places where I've traveled. So even starting as early as my days in Sesame Street and around that scene, I'm influenced by these characters. I'm influenced by their voices. I'm influenced by impressions. I love doing impressions of people. I feel grateful to have an ear that can pick up subtleties of different impressions, and I incorporate that a lot of the time in the music. I incorporate that into my stories. My mother was also on Broadway. She was a Broadway performer. She was on the radio, wonderful, wonderful vocalist and performer throughout the course of her life. So I was influenced by voices I would hear her do on Sesame Street, or the way that she would carry her voice with a big band behind her. Then when I left New York City and I was in the Army, I was playing a lot of orchestral music and ceremonial music, and that influenced my brain. Then I was in New Orleans, and in New Orleans, I was doing a lot of brass band music on the street, where I'd play snare drum with a bunch of horns and brass, behind me, to the jazz cruises to Oklahoma when I was playing at honky-tonk bars out in the country. And we were playing red dirt country music. And here I am, this, Jewish guy from New York City, and I'm living out in Southwest Oklahoma, playing these different bars and venues. And these people to this day are my family. I mean, I'm so close with them. So my musical world is all over the place. Sometimes I'm influenced just in an ancestral sense of music you might hear in the shtetl or that harmonic structure. And that can influence where I go with certain changes when I'm writing a song. So I'm all over the place. I'm an absolute musical melting pot. There's comedy in my music. Sometimes my music is just sentimental and reflection of love and loss and all of this, but just a musical mind that I'm grateful to share with wonderful musicians and creative brains around me.
And how can people connect with you and learn more about your work?
I would say on TikTok and Instagram, those account handles are Live from the Bus, Live, Live from the Bus, and they're the same, TikTok and Instagram. And especially on TikTok, I'm more active than Instagram. I'm starting to become more active on Instagram as well. But I share stories. I share my music. It's a page that I've recently started developing, and I will continue to share original compositions on this page, on all of these pages, Live from the Bus. I'm also so open to musical collaborations, creative collaborations, wonderful podcasts such as this one. I'm very open to connecting with the community. That's really what I'm about, just on and off screen. I'm a person who likes to connect. So I'm around, and that's where you can find me.
Excellent. And I have one final question for you. It's one that I ask every single guest of the podcast. Who would you like to nominate for People Jew Wanna Know?
I've thought about this a lot, and I would say that in true nice Jewish boy fashion, I would like to nominate my mother for the podcast, who grew up at a time where in the arts, as a Jew, she would, anglicize her name. That's what everybody was doing. Her relationship with Judaism and the arts and what was culturally accepted versus living in this masquerade of all these different industries. She has so many stories to tell. She is such a remarkable brain person, loving person, musical mind, theatrical mind, very extroverted, very kind. And I think with what she's seen and experienced in her life, I think that everybody would find her work and her brain fascinating.
Excellent nomination. You would not be the first guest to nominate their mom, because this is, in fact, a Jewish podcast. So the odds of that are quite high. Thank you so much for doing this, Nolan.
Thank you so much for having me, Margarita. This was really, really special. To connect with you, to connect with the entire Jewish community is an absolute blessing. So thank you for thinking of me. Thank you for watching my crazy videos and stories on TikTok and Instagram, and I'm grateful to be here.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People Jew Wanna Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People Jew Wanna Know.